Welcome back, kiddos, to the Marc Clair Show. This is episode number 4. You can find every link you could ever possibly need, every way you can listen to the show, every way you can watch the show, every way you can support the show. You can find that all over at marcclair.com. That's Marc, MarcClair, marcclair.com. You can even join the Telegram group. I have a Telegram group just for people who want to talk about and support the show. That one's free. That one is not a perk for subscribers, although what is a perk for subscribers are all of the episodes early and then their full completed format. What you get here on the public version is a truncated version of the interviews, missing the smoke-filled room segment where we get extra wild and extra crazy, as I did with my guest today, my friend Lance Cayko, who is an incredible entrepreneur. I think there's just so much you're going to be able to learn from him. And with that being said, I think we're going to get right into this thing. So I'll see you at the bottom of the show. Welcome back to the Marc Clair Show. With me today, he is an entrepreneur and business owner. He is also the host of the podcast Inside the Firm, which I had the pleasure of appearing on last year. I'm very pleased to welcome Lance Cayko. Lance, welcome to my show.
Hey, thanks for having me. I need to catch up and redo our intro, man. That was amazing. Whoever did it, I should get in touch with them. Way cooler than ours.
I can definitely connect you for sure. And Lance, there's a lot of things I want to talk to you about. You know, we first came into contact with each other during our mutual ride, I guess you could say, through the libertarian movement. And maybe we can touch on that. Not too much. Maybe we can touch on it. But what I really want to dig into today is just more of your sort of entrepreneurial journey and some of your spiritual journey. So we'll kind of touch on that and see where it goes. But I'll let you start things off and take us from wherever it makes the most sense for you. Maybe get into a little bit of your background and your childhood. And I'm not sure which is going to make sense to bring up first, sort of the thing with your dad or the business stuff. So just take it from wherever it makes sense for you, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, like Marc mentioned, we met through our stint in libertarianismville, and then we both left, it seems like, in a much better place. I think we're more awake. A lot of people think they are awake when
we're
they're
woke
libertarians.
now.
Yeah, real woke, I guess. Libertarians
I got better graphics, you know. I got better animations.
Better graphics. I think a lot of LP libertarians think they are actually awake, and I think they are not. I think they're actually just in sort of some other sort of pseudo religion. And this is coming from, I'm a pretty religious guy. I'm a practicing Catholic and all of that. But anyway, met Marc, and so I'm glad to be back on the show here. My entrepreneurial journey started when I was very, very young. So I grew up between a cattle ranch and a sugar beet and Durham farm. So on one side of the family, they were ranchers.
Sugar beet, is that like a Dwight Schrute beet farm, or is that a different kind of beet? I don't know much about beets.
Yeah. I wonder what kind he grows.
That's the only other beet farm. I think he grows those purple ones.
If he grows the purple ones, then no. So sugar beets, you can actually, sugar beets are like an Eastern European thing, like a Russia thing. So a lot of those farmers that came over to like North Dakota, so, you know, Eastern Germany, think about like German farmers, came over and then they settled in Northwest North Dakota and then Eastern Montana. And the conditions there are much in that region are much like Russia. I mean, it's the tundra, essentially, like how cold it gets and everything. High plains, very cold, and so they were kind of perfect for growing sugar beets. So that's literally what it is. But they're a big white beet. Did not expect to have to explain sugar beets today, but here we are. Either way,
It's a whole new show, Lance. You never know what's going to come up here.
Yeah, grew up between those two families. And my grandmother on the sugar beet side, she kind of gave me my first opportunities to make money. So, neither family was wealthy by any means. And my brother would agree with me, you know, it took him a while to kind of get him to see the light here. For some reason, he was convinced that we didn't grow up poor. And I go, look, man, maybe once it got to be when you were a teenager, you got more than one pair of shoes per year. I go, but when it was just me, and even when you were very, very little and you can't remember that stuff, like when you were 3 or younger, there were summers where there was one summer in particular that I'll never forget. And like, it just always stuck with me was, you remember Aqua Socks? Do you remember those things? People still wear them. In Florida, they sell.
I didn't wear them. I definitely didn't wear them, but I believe I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. They were like before Crocs. They were like the before Crocs thing. But anyway, my mom bought me a pair of those, and that's all I had for like spring, summer, and then eventually they like literally broke and fell apart, and I had to walk home with bare feet. So I grew up, I would say the lowest middle class you could probably be in North Dakota. Like by all means, we were
And
not.
that's still considered middle class there at that time.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, North Dakota, per capita GDP is very low. Like during the mid 2000s and early 2000s, late 90s, there was this big exodus of the population and the oil boom hit. And then they got a bunch more people. And now they're kind of even with where they're at. But by no means wealthy. I mean, to the tune of now, like if I put it in perspective, I remember when AOL first came out and my aunt gifted me a computer. I had one rich aunt and she lived in Idaho, and I ran up you had to dial, like we didn't have internet way out in rural North Dakota. So you had to dial in with the old AOL, like CD.
I'm very familiar with that.
Yeah. Everybody could remember that sound, like the beep, whatever. I ran up. I had no idea it was going to be a long distance call. I just thought like it's the internet. So then somehow there's no long distance thing. Didn't tell my mom and dad. They just trusted me, and I ran up a bill of like $1,000. Oh, and you could have thought, I mean, this is what, 1996. So I guess it was a little bit more money. Like maybe that's $2,000 in today's money, something like that. Like not that giant of a difference, but it was like, I mean, yes, it was my fault, and I shouldn't have done that, but at the end of the day, like for it to be as big of a deal it was financially to see that, I was just like, they had to take out a little loan and stuff. And I was like, what kind of life is this?
Man, they should have done, because my parents did this, because I don't want to get too deep into this, but I met a girl in a chat when I was like 14 or something, and we started a phone relationship. I didn't know it was a thing. She was in the same state. I didn't even think twice about it. I'm like, phone calls are free, whatever. And then similarly, my parents came to me with this giant bill, but they actually called the phone company and got out of it, because they said,
"Oh, really?
That's what your parents should have done." Just saying. But anyway,
I agree. They tried. To be fair, they
really?
did try. I remember them trying to call, be like, look, it was our idiot son.
Didn't work, huh?
But either way, seeing the stress on them, and then growing up in that environment where I felt guilty asking for anything. And I mean, just basic things like, I remember my mother like cutting my hair type of thing. Instead of, going to a proper barbershop or a salon or something and getting a haircut. And I have very interesting hair, right? I mean, it's like partially because of the background that we'll get into about, being mixed to the point of like half South Native American, half North Native American, then the other half a little bit white. But like this very strange sort of nappy kind of crossbreed hair and all that. So that's what drove me to just wanting to being a serial entrepreneur. I mean, to the point where now I've even monetized fishing. So like at every single waking minute and hour, I am making money, because I tell my kids this all the time, is like one of my favorite quotes, believe it or not, is from like Kanye West. And having money isn't everything, but not having it is. And it becomes that. I mean, it truly becomes that. And then it sort of ties all into, me eventually finding my dad too, and finding out that like this is how this guy operates too. So that's where that comes from. Mom and dad, dad worked for grandma and grandpa on the sugar beet farm and could never convince his dad. He would make like $100 a day back in the day. He would only work for like 5 or 6 months out of the year. And then he would chop firewood for the rest of the year. We made it fine. We did, there was a few times where I do remember like going a little bit hungry. There not being like leftovers or anything like that after supper. So sort of right on that edge of just like, there was enough hunger to really drive that. Mom is still working for the same place. She works for Indian Health Service. Wow. And she was a dental assistant. She made okay money. I mean, just like average lower middle class type of wages. Then eventually became their secretary and stuff. But she still works there. She's now 62, I think. So she's still working there. Like these people, mom and dad, God bless them, but they are just not business driven, entrepreneurial driven. They have no idea how capital works. They have no interest in ever taking any risks in terms of like buying real estate rental properties or investing in the stock market on their own, rather than just throwing it into like a boring 401k, anything like that. My brother is much the same. I gave him shit last year, and I said, look, if I like, he's a professional bow hunter, not by living, but with, just he's been on television. Like you could look up Lucas Cayko, White Knuckle Productions. And he's been on television quite a few times on these DVDs of like hunting white-tailed deer. And his whole goal was when like right after he graduated high school was to become a professional hunter outdoorsman who gets paid to do it. Like this is his job every day. And whether that's through like how YouTubers are doing it now and kind of what I'm doing, where I'm making these videos and then I monetize them on YouTube or on Newsbreak or go after sponsors and stuff like that. I was like, once I got back into fishing a couple years ago, then I told him like, this is my goal. Like, because mom growing up, like she would tell all my girlfriends and even my wife multiple times when she'd meet them, like, oh yeah, when Lance was a little boy, he always wanted to be a professional fisherman. Like he'd always write that down when the teacher said that and everything like that. And I told my brother, like, if I monetize this before you should be ashamed. Like you're the one that was doing all of these things gung-ho. You didn't even leave home because you didn't want to leave those kind of territories with all the public land that you can hunt and film and do all these things. He was doing this way before I was. Not the fishing side and everything. So mom and dad ended up with sort of this hunter and fisherman. So kind of fast forward a little bit. I went to, I tried working on the farm one summer with my dad and on the sugar beet farm. And what you do there is between that and Durham is just wheat. The way you irrigate them in that valley is water the crops and everything is we dig these little ditches off of these bigger ditches. And then you either use dams. So like these canvases that you set in the ditches and then they dam the water up and then you scoop out like parts of the ditch that you dug with the tractor and then it floods. It's either flood irrigation or with the sugar beets, it was using these like metal tubes that you siphon through and then you get them like sucking water out. I lasted like a couple days. And it's not because I'm a pussy, because I really, I mean, I think I'm not that
Doesn't sound like the most exhilarating work.
It was terrible because you never been in North Dakota, Mark, right?
I have not.
Okay. If you ever go, like I do think everybody should go because it actually is a beautiful place on the west side.
I plan to. We're looking at a big road trip next summer. So I'm planning to swing through that way because I haven't been through that whole section of the U.S. yet.
Yeah. South Dakota like is actually beautiful. Mount Rushmore, all that stuff. But when you get to North Dakota, that's the thing. Like in the winter, like I said about having this similarity to like a Russian type of landscape where it's very harsh. In the winter, the same thing is for the summer. So in the summer, it's like 90 degrees, 90% humidity, very, very hot, very sticky. And then the mosquitoes, people complain about mosquitoes in Colorado. And I go, what mosquitoes? And they go like, how can you even be outside? I'm like, I'm outside all the time in the woods, deep in the wilderness. There's still hardly any mosquitoes. In North Dakota, they will actually get you to the point where you can't do anything outside. I mean, they just swarm you like crazy. Yeah. So that's what you're up against when you're trying to irrigate these farms in the summer. Plus my dad who raised me, who's now come to find out not my biological father, we just didn't get along that well. And I always had a suspicion of why we didn't get along. A lot of it comes down to biology, I think, and just the sort of nature versus nurture aspect of it all.
So do you mean to say like even as a kid, you kind of had this feeling he wasn't your real dad? Or maybe you couldn't pinpoint it to that extent, but you knew something was off? Or
it was like, the best way I describe it is like when you have a magnet and you try to put the positive end to the negative end, or excuse me, the positive and the positive, and they push away, or negative to negative and they push away, right? It was just it was just like this unnatural natural effect. When I was growing up, I actually would tell my brother, because I look more white than my brother. I joked the other day on Facebook that I'm a graham cracker. My wife is a actual cracker because my wife is white. Because I'm just a little bit caramel. I get every once in a while, like if it's in the summer. In
just
Colorado,
enough to meet that diversity quotient, maybe.
Yeah, no, actually, true. Except for, yeah. So I was a little bit enough white looking to like my brother is. I'm not black, but darn close. Like he's very, very dark and he has straight black hair. He looks like when he grows his hair out, and he and I are doing this winter, like he looks Native American. I mean, out of a book, Native American. So our dad who raised us, all white, 100% white. The whitest, one of the whitest guys you'll ever meet. Kind of looks like, do you know the character on the Mountain Dew bottle? Like that guy? That's what he looks like. Old man Tucker, that sort of thing, like a very cowboy-ish old mountain man. Growing up, I would tell my brother all the time, Dad's not your real dad. Like I'm I'm dad's real son. Like, you're not, there's no way that dad is your real dad, because he was so dark. It would just devastate him. It would just devastate him. So tried doing working on the farm for like 3 or 4 days, maybe even a week, something like that. And I hated it. And we would just butt heads and we would argue and, stuff like that. So I said, and he said, well, you got to do something. And I go, I agree. Plus I wanted money for school clothes, and he was such a cheap ass that, for him, like, it would just blow his mind that, like, jeans are $40. Like, yeah, jeans are $40. Like, I don't know what to tell you, bro. It is what it is. And I was trying to, you're in that teenage sort of mindset of like, I need to look fresh. I was into girls. I was like a preppy kid back in the day.
It's going to be hard to pick up chicks in the aqua socks,
Yeah, especially when they're falling apart, right? So I called his friend up, and his name is Bruce, and he was a general contractor. And I'd always liked building things because I grew up with the Legos. Grandma would always give me opportunities to like build things, and then I would always be drawing. So there was always that creative sort of creation. I need to be a maker. I need to be a maker, whatever that means at that point. Called him up and I said, hey, I know you have a construction company. Like, what are you guys doing this summer? And he said, well, we're roofing. And I said, well, I'm looking for a job. I'll do whatever it takes. And he said, sure, you could be our gopher. You can go for this, you can go for that. And I'll pay it $7.25 an hour. And then he said, Jeff will pick him up or something like that. My dad had all these buddies because it was his buddy. They all lived in town and they all worked for Bruce. A lot of them did. So it was kind of convenient too. So like they would pick me up in the morning at like 4 or 5. We'd head to the job site. We tore off and put on 80 roofs that summer. So one a day. We would get there before sunrise, right at sunrise, tear off the roof, have it off in like 2 or 3 hours, and we'd have it back on another 3 or 4. And then we'd be done for the day. It was incredibly exhausting. It was dirty. And it was, but I loved every minute of it. Not only the hard work, because I was a skinny little kid too, and I just wanted to get a little bigger. But I really actually liked just the way the construction guys were. Like there was catcalling that happened. Like it was an alpha male environment, 100%. You can imagine. It may or may not like bum my first cigarette from those guys. Had a first beer from those guys, after work sort of thing. But like, it was such an awesome experience for a 13-year-old. That's all I was, 13, 14. Wow. I just loved every minute of it. I was like, oh my gosh. And then that same guy explained to me at the end of the summer, he goes, I don't know why. I don't know. I actually got in touch with him recently again this last year after he saw me on a different podcast. His wife reached out to me, and so I sent him that podcast because I mentioned him on it and talked about how he was a mentor and everything. It kind of made his life. I couldn't believe it. He was like, you were the only one. He's like, Lance, you were the only one that gave a shit, that like paid attention, that actually wanted to understand how everything worked. So one of the things that he then told me about was like, look, here's how it works. Is like, I'm billing you out at $45 an hour. I pay you $7.25 an hour. And I was like, oh. He goes, yeah, some of it goes to insurance. Sure. Some of it goes like workman's comp and all that kind of stuff. But he's like, 50% it goes to me. Like the 50% of the 45 goes to me. And that's how I make money. Right. He had more things. He had more freedom, it seemed like. And then for me, there's like that one little tiny thing that I understood about billability and in a service-based environment. It just unlocked everything for me. And then I said, oh my God, profit's okay. This is my way out. And so at first I wanted to be a builder. So then every summer after that, I would go do a different trade: concrete, framing, siding, sheetrock, whatever.
You had the sort of forethought even at that age to think, okay, yeah, I've learned this skill, but I shouldn't just stick with this skill. I should expand my skill set from there. That's pretty impressive for a 14-year-old.
Yeah. And to be fair, it was part of it was to Bruce. He just showed me that because I would see that, like, I understood that that's how he was a general contractor, one that could manage all these different subs and then also do some of the work himself if he had to, of like understanding all those trades frontwards, backwards, who does what task before the others. Like, it's so, that's why, with even our construction company now, we didn't really make too much money especially this last year, maybe like 5-10% profit, which is terrible for service. But it's been an investment in those guys about teaching them the importance of the trade sequence, so that if they are just even managing the drywall sub, let's say next week, they're paying attention to what the framers are doing. So, and they know that like what they should be instructing the framers to do, so that the drywallers aren't pissed off and walking off the site right away first day, and so that everything works, much more in tandem that way, that sort of thing. So I did that for up until I worked, if I started at 13, 7 summers basically, or excuse me, 5 summers doing all those different kind of trades. At 18, I decided to go to North Dakota State School of Science. I was actually just kind of like a lower B level student in high school, because I went to a very small school. Like the town I grew up in was 500 people, 20 people per class, basically a village. Like it wasn't even an incorporated city, like town. So they didn't even have a tax base. It was kind of like unincorporated in a county sort of thing. But the reason I'm bringing it up is like I hated high school because academically, because there was no choice. Like you could not even choose a class. It is what it is. So when I went to North Dakota State School of Science for building construction tech, I was just convinced like, hey, I'm a Native American, so I've applied for these different scholarships. I have a good enough grades to kind of meet that diversity quota, like you were saying. Like I took advantage of it. I was one of the smart Native Americans who did it. I would say the majority are not. The majority. So like the whole idea of affirmative action is it's a good idea on its face, in the sense of if the minorities actually took advantage of it, great, but they don't. And I'm a testament to tell you that. For anybody who's screaming into the radio right now, listening to this, or their headphones, like, trust me, I grew up with Native Americans. The majority of my friends from my hometown are Native Americans, mixed race, and I'm one of the very, very few out of hundreds and thousands of them that actually took advantage of it and made something for themselves. So
it's available to anybody. So why do you think that like that's not taken advantage of? Is it like a shame thing, or is a lack of information about it? Why do you think like you are one of the only people that you know?
Lack of initiative. It's easier to just fall back on the free money that's already there anyway, or the free services that are already there. It's like if I stayed home in Trenton, North Dakota right now, I could be saving $600 a month, or excuse me, actually more than that now, $800 a month, instead of paying into a private health share account, because the health service is free. Like that's huge. Like why would I ever leave? Like why would I try to go and do anything beyond that if the default is already there? So like that's a problem with the socialism in these Native American communities, is it really does just hold you back, because you are like, it's pretty nice here, in the sense of I don't have to put much effort out, right? Humans want the least passive resistance. Like that's just the natural state of
Do you
man.
think there is intention behind that? Do you think that's just a sort of a
yes, both yes and no? Like I think there is an evil intention. Sure. I think there's probably enough people in the room when it was voted on, or when these policies were starting to take place, to where there were sort of these people just going, oh, I know what this is going to do in the end. So yeah, I'm going to vote yes for this. But then there's always the other people who, it was good intention that they had, but it's an unintended consequence in the end as a whole, for sure. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So how did you sort of take that entrepreneurial spirit that you had, going from sort of skill to skill to skill, and when did you take that into actually starting your own business?
So enough people had to piss me off to give me the fuel to want to do it. So a couple of weeks ago, I picked up a Marcus Aurelius's book, and I was reading it for a different reason. It was kind of like a personal reason. I was trying to figure out how to fight less with my wife and be less reactionary, and just kind of agree and do all these things or whatever. But in reading that book, I realized
it is easier when you just agree. I will say that.
Yeah, 100%. What I realized though through reading that was like, I was already practicing a form of stoicism. And when, the reason why I went to school, people pissed me off in high school and said, well, this kid's not going to amount to anything. kind of had the Michael Jordan chip on my shoulder. So one summer after I came back, the first summer I came back from trade school, I tried to go work for another contractor again and learn a different trade. And this one was going to be steel framing. I hadn't done any light gauge steel framing. And this guy just pissed me off to no end because there's something about, like, I don't do this with my workers. I have 2 carpenters right now for our construction firm, and I give them as much freedom as they feel comfortable doing with a task, right? We'll watch YouTube videos. I'll show them in person how to do things. But for some reason, when I was growing up, it was not that way. It was just like, nope, you got to do this for 10 years before I trust you to frame out a door or something like that. So I started butting heads with this guy, did not like him at all. And that's when I put out my first ad. So I put out an ad, and I kind of wrote it like a personal ad. I said, hey, young, smart, sober. I always put sober because that's a problem.
You have to really clarify that in that community, huh?
You really do, yep. But what happens is like, then I ended up getting this customer. And the first thing I did was I built just a set of steps for her, and she really liked it. And then she said, hey, you know what? I have a house out in the country as well. And I'm an artist, and I need to redo this 1 bedroom and turn it into an art studio. So that was my first like real construction client project and everything like that. And then everything else was like history from there in terms of I figured out how to put out an ad. And then I got referrals and that sort of thing. But then after I finished tech school, you know, the whole idea with tech school was building construction tech was to be a general contractor. But all of a sudden I was like finding myself thriving in tech school, in school in general for the first time, like almost a straight A student, which opened up all kinds of opportunities for other scholarships. And I figured out actually how to monetize myself. Like I was getting paid. It wasn't that much, but it was only like back in the day, like as a college student, like 25, 30,000 a year after school was already paid for. And so I found myself looking at the blueprints, and they were actual blueprints even back then, on this house we were building in tech school at the end. And I was like, well, why did they draw it like that? Like, I want to know. And it sort of was playing on this whole, hey, I've learned all the trades. Like, what if I could also design the buildings too? Like, if I could design them plus build them and then eventually develop them, like I will make 3x the money of a builder, 3x the money of an architect, 3x the money as even a developer. And then I'll be even more free. The whole idea is like never to hopefully have to worry about money. So I applied to North Dakota State University Architecture School. It's competitive. So you get in there, and then you go from 350 students the first year down to 50. It's based on GPA and portfolio and everything like that. Again, figured out how to monetize myself. I took advantage of, it's called a cultural diversity tuition waiver. So there you go. Found myself
there's some libertarians out there screeching and screaming away right now at this stuff, taking the state money or what have you. Obviously this is before you were even thinking along those lines, but like, do you run into this now? Still having run in those circles? Do people ever give you shit for taking advantage of that sort of thing?
No, because there's Murray Rothbard at least has some things right. I think he has a lot of things right. Even what's her name? Ayn Rand made the same argument for Social Security. She's like, "Look, I already paid for it. Why wouldn't I take that money back out?" Like, what are you going to do? Just not take advantage of the system that is taking advantage?
No, I'm going to keep myself in a worse position just to please some people that might not like it. That's what I'm going to do.
Yeah, exactly. And then the worst, the leftist politicians, like they actually do it even better than everybody else. Like, so. It's you don't like it would be like it's like the analogy of the frog in the boiling pot of water, except does the frog see that there's actually like sort of a raft in the water, right? So
your little frog staircase, maybe
something like that, right? So
no, but the guy that made the pot built the staircase, and that guy is a piece of shit, and the pot shouldn't even exist. So I'm not going to do it. Yeah,
exactly. No one's free from sin. I think that's the other big thing too, is I always try to say, like, no one is free from sin in this world. You know what I mean? So like even the arguments that people give against Elon Musk in the libertarian circles drove me nuts, because I'm like you guys want to bitch about these roads all day long, but like, how'd you get to work? Oh, through like the roads that were, the money was stolen from you and built all the shitty roads and all that stuff. So anyway, that's I let it roll off my back, because I like to say, like, well, I'm actually one of the only real libertarians anyway, because I'm the one building the roads. Like, how many roads have you built? And I'm serious. Like, I actually build the physical roads. So finished out graduate architecture school, graduated at the top of the class. And then here's the next person who pissed me off, and this is why it matters. I graduated at the top of the class. My business partner did as well. Al, his name is Al Gore. He co-hosts our show, Inside the Firm podcast, with me. And we both went our separate ways with the idea that maybe in 10 years we'll come back together and start an architecture firm. We were like this power duo in college because there was these competitions you would do, and we won the skyscraper competition. We were in separate studios as graduate students, and just felt like the best way we're going to do the best thesis projects is if we move our desks closer together again. Best friends at all levels and all of that. And so I went to Boulder. I can only afford to live in Longmont, but I worked in Boulder, Longmont, Colorado. And then my business partner, Al, went to New York City, and he used to work he got an internship with Daniel Libeskind. Daniel Libeskind is, for anybody who doesn't know who that is, he is the architect who did the Holocaust Museum in Germany, that really famous one. He did the Denver Art Museum, and most notably, he did the first redesign of the World Trade Center 1, which never got built, but he was the architect for that originally, the rebuild after 9/11.
So it's kind of a big deal.
Kind of a big deal. Huge deal to get that internship. It was 2008. And then everybody knows what happened in 2009. So, and then what happened, just the Great Recession happened. The financial markets completely melted down, all from the housing market. Well, architects and builders do housing. And so we suffered the most, actually. The unemployment rate in the architecture community was 50%. 50%. And so graduating at the top of the class like that and I got a very good internship too. The internship I was working on it was formerly Studio HT was the firm. And it was run by two guys, Brad Thomas at Christopher Hare. But they didn't know shit about business. They were just awful about business. The architects have a problem with being good business people instead of just trying to be good artists. They really think like they're selling their soul or selling out if it turns into a business for them. And it can't coexist together. It's like one or the other. Either your business and your pure commodity and just doing Taco John's all day to them, or you're like Studio Daniel Libeskind or Studio HT and doing very high-end art style architecture. The problem with that is that then I got laid off. And that was completely devastating because these guys were catering towards the top 1%. And at that point, it's probably like the 0.1%. And even those folks didn't have money to spend, during the Great Recession. So they did not have a variety and a diversity of kind of work typologies. They weren't doing like for instance, we do single family, multifamily, commercial, industrial. We also have a podcast that we make money off of. We have real estate investments. We are developers. We are also builders. Like it's going to take it would take a Great Recession 2x, 5x in this next turnaround for us to, and plus they paid themselves way too much. It didn't have a big cash reserve savings or anything like that. They had no plan. They weren't even advertising. So those guys really pissed me off. And so what I ended up doing is I knew I was going to get laid off. So leading up to that, Alex and I were still talking. He was in New York. And I got laid off before him, and I just could feel it coming. Because there's no, what am I doing? I'm working on the same house for 6 months. That's not sustainable. I know what the fees are. And so I started doing I noticed at that point too, the community was switching from AutoCAD, which is just 2D lines on a computer screen, over to this 3D type of modeling software called Revit. And so one of the things when they were transitioning from 2D to 3D that they were missing was all of these components that needed to be translated from 2D to 3D. And a lot of it was furniture and stuff like that. So I started modeling that stuff I would wake up at 5 before I would go to Boulder to go to work. And for at least an hour in the morning, all by myself in my home office, I would model all these models. And I started uploading them to a site called TurboSquid. And I got noticed because I was modeling the most out of anybody in the world at that point. I got noticed by their team, who was then starting to work with these building product manufacturers like windows, doors, all stuff like that, components, that people make to go into buildings. And they said, hey, we have a big client who is wanting us to find talent to make these things. So I kept in touch with them for 3 or 4 months, got laid off, still kept in touch with those people. When I got laid off, I had also had Craigslist ads ready to go. And Craigslist actually used to be a lot, I feel like it was a lot better in this one particular sense. When you put up advertisements on Craigslist back in the day, you could do it. You could do it for free. Number one, and number two, though, you could write just a little bit of code, like HTML code, and you could put images in your ads. So I was out competing all of these grumpy old, drunk and high contractors and handymen, because I did the same kind of write up that I did like a decade before that. Young, smart, sober, strong back.
And I've got pictures.
And here's the pictures. And so I got all these calls from these housewives in Boulder, which Boulder was kind of recession proof during that Great Recession, in the sense of like housing prices it was like a 1% dip. People still had enough money. They were still high earners. Tech never took a recession during then. And we are kind of like the Silicon Valley of the Midwest, so to speak, in Boulder County. Got all this kind of handyman work for cash, never took an unemployment check. So that's one of the arguments I make back to libertarians too, is I go like, look, hey, I never took an unemployment check the whole time. I could have done it. Never did. And then Turbo Squid finally came online. And
did you not take that clients. Just because did you feel like, I don't think it was like a moral thing for you, I think, but was it more this like you didn't want that to even weigh you down? Or
both of it.
Yeah.
Both of those things. First, the base was exactly that, was this I don't want it to weigh me down. I don't want the extra paperwork. You got to prove all this. You got to prove like that I'm applying to these things. And it's like, and I hate taxes. So it's like, I'm just going to work for cash. And I did. I worked for cash, and I was actually ended up making more money doing those gigs, and I needed the cash right away too, because I wasn't about to pick up my family and move back to North Dakota. Colorado is beautiful. Despite its politics, like it is an amazing place. The weather is fantastic. Like we can get 70-degree days in February, in January, believe it or not. And it's nice and dry. I don't do well with humidity, back to the mosquitoes sort of thing. Right. So it was all of that kind of all in one. Then through those ads and those people, then I started to get a little bit of architecture work. And so I had all this modeling work. I ended up getting a house through a connection down in Colorado Springs. I actually ended up getting a clinic through that connection, and bringing that work all the way back to the shitty firm that fired me or laid me off. And I had to do that because like I was unlicensed at that time. And there's only, you have to be careful about what you can do. Like I couldn't even use the word architect. I could just say like residential drafter or designer to try to stay under the radar of Colorado and all of that. So like when I got the clinic, I actually had to call the old firm up. I say, hey, I got a lead on a clinic. Maybe we can split the money. I'll work under you guys. You guys will be the prime. I will just be the drafts person sort of thing. And get that going. So that was from 2010 to 2013. It was Alex and I navigating this world where we can't call ourselves architects. We are still attracting architectural work because of the ads we have on Craigslist. We're out competing the other architects. And then eventually in 2013, the economy started to take off a little bit, and we started to get bigger, better clients. We gained some mentors along the way, because in Colorado, you can do a house of 13,000 square feet or under as an unlicensed architect, as a designer. And then you have to get all these points too, right? So you have to get all these points so that you can eventually get licensed and take these 7 excruciating tests. And so we did that between 2013 and 2015. And then after that, then we just kind of turned the whole faucet on, and we could actually outwardly advertise and call ourselves architects. And since then, it has been, I wouldn't say a hockey stick growth, but it's certainly been maybe at like a 45-degree, 60-degree angle in terms of just overall revenue, staff, and then what we've done since then. And to kind of tie the whole thing together about doing all these trades, being just this person who is trying to make money at every turn, so it buys me more freedom and maneuverability on the chessboard of life. is in 2014, my business, we had 2013. I remember we got this duplex, and it was down in Golden, Colorado. So Alex and I we're celebrating we're going to go to Boulder, and we're going to go to like a burger shop or something like that, something simple. We were driving back from Boulder, back to the apartment that's where we had our first office, was his apartment. And we call up our friend Blake, and we told Blake, we're like, hey, what's going on? He's like, I hate my job. He was an architect too up in South Dakota. He's like, I hate my job. He's like, I just want to build a tiny house and just take photographs and just drive around. And I go, why don't you do that? You got no kids? I had 2 kids at that point. You got no kids. You got no wife. How much money do you got? He's like, I got about 25K in my account. We're like, perfect. That's all you need. And so we, Alex and
that's a great place to be in at that point in life. Like if you don't have a family yet, like you have so much freedom to take risks. Like your risks, like, okay, worst case, fine, you go live on a friend's couch if you get broke. Like you can't take that same risk when you have the wife and kids. Like you're not going to say, all right, maybe we'll just go sleep on a couch. You're not going to do that. But you're so free at that point, man. That is the time to take those risks.
And if you aren't, I think you're wasting your life. Like, what are you doing with your life? Don't live a life like that and then have a life of regret in your 40s.
And you can still take risks when you have a family, of course, but not to the same extent as you can in that situation you described.
Right. I mean, you would be like risking literally not just being around. Like, yeah, I agree. So we got to the apartment that night, and our apartments, I guess, I lived right kitty corner to him downstairs, and he lived upstairs. And we bought a domain name on the web, and it was blakestinyhouse.com. And we made a quick little landing page and stuff. And then we published it. And then we emailed him in the morning. We go, look, we're doing it. Thinking we could like push him to do it. And he went along with it for about a year. And we teamed up with another gal that we graduated with. Her name is Sarah. And we came up with all these designs. And this was like post, but still the recession was very deep. I mean, it really was a couple years, especially in some certain markets. And but why I'm saying that is because then the tiny house movement kind of exploded during then, because people were reacting to this overloaded and overheated housing market. And they were like, what are we doing? Like, do we actually need these McMansions, these large mortgages and all of that? So organically, we would get like over 100 visits on that website every day. I mean, it just became overwhelming at some point. We would get calls from TV producers, CBS, HGTV, NBC, who were looking for people that wanted to build tiny houses. And then they wanted to start these reality shows about them. That's when reality TV was also kind of hitting, starting to crescendo. And so my business partner, in 2014, him and his fiance at that time, they went down to the Denver house and garden show or something like that. And there was HGTV was there. And they said, Al was like, they said, hey, there was a tiny house. They were showcasing a tiny house. And Al was like, oh yeah, we've been thinking about building one for a couple of years now. And he showed him the website and stuff. And they go, oh, well, you guys are going to build it? And he's like, yeah, we're going to build it. And then he signed up, and he came back to the office on Monday. He goes, by the way, I signed us up. We're going to build a tiny house. We have a phone call with HGTV at like noon today. And I was like, what? And I usually, like, if Al has a good idea and I have a good idea, we are in tune enough now. Since we're best friends and all, we just know each other inside and out. Like, we know when to run with the other person's idea and just, amplify it. So I said, sure, let's do it. So we had a really good interview with them. Then we scrambled and got some financing together to get the materials so we could build it. And shot with HGTV for a couple months. And then if people want to look it up, it's season 1, episode 13. If you just Googled Alex and Lance's tiny folding house, it's on Tiny House Big Living. And
so this is not the biggest show you've been on. I thought you were hitting the big time, and turns out you were already big time.
Well, in the podcast circuit, Mark. Yeah, sure. So that was really cool, and it ended up giving us like this. We didn't get paid. You do not get paid to be on HGTV. You get exposure. And so what we got was this amazing exposure. Every 2 weeks we were on HGTV. And we had the coolest tiny house. And then that tiny house ended up winning an International Architecture Award We went to New York. We accepted the award. It was a red carpet type of stuff. And then a year later, Subaru saw it. And Subaru, they sponsor this thing called Winterfest in Colorado. And they work with this company that puts on events. And Al gets a call one day and he goes, hey, I just got a phone with Subaru and they want us to build 2 more of these. But they want them to be like the tiny house we built, but on steroids. They want it to be, because this tiny house was, if you go to our website and you go look up, you go to f9productions.com and look up Atlas tiny house. It was the tiny houses at that time were like shitty cabins on wheels. You know, it was sort of this like, I get what you're trying to do, but why are you guys going into nature? You're just recreating an RV, and an RV sucks because an RV doesn't, you know, like you get a little portal window, like you have to go outside to be in nature, but yeah, you're in nature. Like, what are you doing exactly, you know, with that experience? Ours had a huge glass wall, giant glass wall. I mean, felt like you were sleeping outside. It had a foldable deck, a foldable awning. It collected rainwater. It had solar panels on it. It was super modern. That's why I won all these awards and stuff. But Subaru saw it and they were just like, no one else is doing this. We can't do this. We got to hire these guys to do this because we want to take our 2 and we're gonna make them travel around the United States for Winterfest. So they would go to all these ski resorts like Breckenridge, Vail, all the way over to the East Coast, all those ones and stuff like that. And Al was like, first I said, look, Al, this was what, 2015? Yeah. So I was engaged with my second wife. She has 2 kids. I had 2 kids. Huge family for modern standards. Al was getting ready to have his first kid. And I was like, look, bud. Plus I was just in the middle of designing and building my house with my current wife, who I was just engaged to at that time. It was a lot. It was a lot going on. Mm-hmm. And I was like, Al, that was so hard to build. Like that was so hard. We invented architecture. I mean, no one else was making a foldable tiny house, one that could like transform. The whole idea was like, let's make it a transformer. And he goes, well, what if I tell him this number? And I go, if they go for that number, I will build it. No problem. And they didn't even blink. So we gave him a very high fee. We successfully built the 2 houses and we had enough profit from that. We killed ourselves like we always do in every build, but we had enough profit to where we were like, okay, like, are we going to buy a piece of land? We've always wanted to be developers because that's where you make the real money. That's where you get the real clout, is if you can withstand, you know, the government bureaucracy and the public disdain for developers is like, you can become truly free in that kind of way. So we bought 1/3 of an acre and then in North Longmont, where we were already working anyway, and moved out of our rental eventually. The space we were leasing for our office. And we built a 6-plex and a triplex. And where I'm sitting right now, where everybody can see the background, I'm actually sitting in the mezzanine of the building that I own. The lower floor houses our construction company. The upper floor is where all the architects are. And then behind me, I own 2 of the rentals. So now I'm a real estate investor in that
all
sense.
This ultimately coming from just a 13-year-old kid who took a stab at roofing, essentially, what was the beginning of this whole process for you. And I think, like, I do want to move on and get into a little bit of the story about your dad before we wrap up the main show here. But I think, like, one of the big lessons you can see through this whole story that you're laying out here is you don't have to have it all figured out. In fact, it's impossible to have it all figured out in the beginning. You just need to act, because that's what I notice every step of your story here, is that you never really look, okay, you have this idea to learn roofing, and then you learn another trade, but you never got complacent at any of these steps. Even today, I'm sure you're not complacent with where you are here. You're always looking for that next big thing, but you're not letting the fact that you don't have that next big thing figured out, you don't have it mapped out, you're not letting that stop you from moving on to that next big thing, if that makes sense. I think that's kind of what I get from this.
100%. Yeah, I think that's exactly why I know your audience is, there's a lot of libertarians, so this is just to them. This is what's holding you
anybody
back.
Who's stuck around with me this long, they're not going to be scared off anymore. So it's
but this is what's holding you back, or anybody in that matter. For like, if you have read 10 books on business, it's going to be that much harder for you to start your business rather than just starting the business, then reading the books.
Absolutely.
It just, every single time it goes into that, like, you just got to take the fear, rip the Band-Aid off, rip the damn Band-Aid off. And there will
That's
be
what I have to
time-
tell podcast clients as well. You know, they come in, I want to have it all figured out. I'm like, you can take 100 podcast courses, but it kind of in the same way, it's almost like at some point, at least in the beginning, the more information you're taking in, the more it's going to stop you from starting because you feel so overwhelmed. And well, I got to figure these 9 things out and these 10 things out, but you actually don't. You can start with the shitty thing or the semi-shitty thing.
Yeah.
Maybe don't start too shitty. Get some things figured out, but then just do it. Because you're
Just
only
do
going to
it.
get better by actually
and
doing
be consistent. Yeah, and be consistent. Like with podcasting, that's one of the biggest things. Is like, the most of them fail because they don't stick to. I'm do one a week, one a month, like whatever your schedule is. Like I don't care if it's shitty content. You got to get it out there. You'll work through that shitty content. Eventually, you just have good content no matter what because you are a professional. I mean, you do the 10,000 hours thing. And the other thing I would say too is like, I've 2 things. One, I mean, for me, being a practicing Catholic and your brother in Christ is like, I feel like I am bulletproof from the point of being in God's grace. So like when I was balls deep in our development and was staring down the barrel of a $3 million hard money loan to get this done, at my like 80th day working in a row, it was every day talking to God and asking to be in the grace. And every single time it's worked out in my life, to make sure I have that kind of relationship going. And it just levels you up. The other thing is at every
there's
turn,
something there that, because I know there's probably people of definitely people of various religious beliefs, ranging from just different religions or just pure atheism or whatever it might be, who might scoff at that or what have you. But I mean, it is a consistent thing from a lot of people I've met and talked to and my own experiences over the years. It almost doesn't matter what you're behind, what the actual beliefs are. But if you consistently sort of put the right intention out there, whether it's really God talking to you back to you and helping guide you, or whether it's just you putting the right energy and spirit into that, having that center and having that focus is absolutely essential wherever you may get it from.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, exactly. The second thing is I have always felt like I either get it done at the very last minute or it's like right by the last second. And so like there is no breathing room, and that's okay. It's like the opposite end of ripping the Band-Aid off. Like, okay, I've ripped the Band-Aid off. Now the wound healed just in time. And I like the perfect example with the development was we had all the units sold, and then but the margins were so thin. Like our margins were like 7%. That's awful for a developer. But it was our first development. We learned a lot. We leveled up. It's paid dividends in so many different ways. But the last minute lesson here was we had all of them sold except for one. And the one was, I woke up one morning. We were like a week away from finishing the project. And it did the amount of work. I'm not joking with the 80 days in a row. It was 80 days of physical labor for me in a row. My wife will attest to that. I've said it multiple times on our show. You can actually the episode on our show that talks about this is Don't Go Chasing Waterfalls. Because I opened up the door of one of the condos and it was a waterfall. So there was a pipe that burst on the upper floor. We were a week away from finishing this thing. And just like being able to breathe and get out of the whole thing and be done with it. And kind of out of this sort of purgatory that we created on Earth. And that condo flooded, that buyer backed out. And then we had to negotiate with our lender, and we had to go back to insurance and get this, insurance thing going to reconstruct it and everything like that. We finally sold that unit 3 months later after we closed. We sold it on the day the market was the highest right before the pandemic hit. And then the market crashed. So if you go look at that, like in March, I think it was like 14th or something like that. On that high, we sold the Dow. The highest market was at in March in 2020, and the next day. So like, it's just providence all day long for me.
Wow. Well, Lance, I do want to get into the story about your dad, but I'm thinking maybe we'll just tease that a little bit and save the juicy details for the smoke-filled room for the bonus segment, since we are kind of running up on our time here. So why don't you kind of just tease that a little bit? Tell us sort of the basics of what happened, and we'll get into the details in the bonus show, and then wrap things up here.
Yeah, sure. I'm not sure how to tease it other than my mother.
I'll tease it. Lance meets his real dad. Everybody, tune in to hear how.
There you go. At the ripe old age of 33, I'm 39 now. So
Wow. And that does tie in a little bit, as we'll get into in the bonus show, into sort of your religious journey as well. So if you want to hear all of that, stay tuned. Of course, subscribers on Rockfin, Patreon, Subscribestar, you will all get the full episode of this program. But before then, Lance, we'll wrap up here. Why don't you just let everybody know how they can, of course, find your company? Hey, maybe they're looking to have a house built or another tiny house or something, but also your podcast, and feel free to plug away on anything else you got going on.
Yeah, follow us. We're very active on LinkedIn, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram at F9 Productions. It's the letter F, the number 9, the word Productions. That's our architecture company. You can even sign up on our website for our newsletter. Keep in touch that way. And then check out my fishing channel. I have a fishing channel. I'm actually technically a professional fisherman at this point, since I get paid to do it. You could be on YouTube, Fishing with Lance. And then last but not least, you can follow our whole journey of our entrepreneurial journey. We started episode 0 at InsideTheFirmPodcast.com. And we talk about from the day we started the firm all the way up until now. We bring you inside the firm, pun intended.
All right. Well, Lance, Cayko, thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate you coming on the show. And we'll get into more of those juicy details. You're going to join me in the smoke-filled room in just a minute, but thanks for coming on.
Thanks.
All right, gang, that does it for my discussion with Lance Cayko. Or does it? It doesn't really do it, because you can find even more. You can get the full story about how Lance reconnected with his father, and there is just so much within that we learned about Lance and about his story that is just mind-blowing at the end, and it really does tie in to his kind of religious rebirth along the way. So you can get that full, complete story over there in the premium version in the smoke-filled room segment, which is part of the extended premium versions of all these episodes, which are available on several ways. You can get them over on Patreon, patreon.com/Marc Clair Show, subscribestar.com/ I think it's the Marc Clair Show. There might be dashes there. You can figure it out. And of course, at Rockfin, you can find me, the Marc Clair Show, where all of these episodes are released in their extended, complete format, usually a few weeks ahead of time, if not a full month, as was the case with some of these early episodes here. So patrons, Rockfin supporters, you guys have access. The great supporters I'm going to tell you about. He is my very first Lucky 77 member. His name is Jared Wall, and he runs a great website for getting THC products, legal products, mind you, because they are Delta 8 THC. He would not send you anything that was not legal. Don't you worry about that. It is legal in most states, so go ahead over to the THCHempspot.com. I'm saying that as not part of the URL. See, this is the hard thing about things not being typed out. You'll find all this stuff in the show notes on whatever platform you listen to. But head over to THCHempspot.com, and if the wide array of products there was not enough for you to entice you, they have some great gummies, some vapes, some flour, whatever it is you're looking for. You're going to be enticed by this little discount. You're going to get 15% off, but you got a pretty little task first. You got to spell my name right. My first name, Marc, M-A-R-C. You use discount code Marc, M-A-R-C. You get 15% off your entire order from my man, the Lucky 77, the premier Lucky 77 himself, Jared Wall. Of course, you can find the tiers. If you want one of these tiered subscriptions, of course, Jared, every month, he gets to choose between 4 weeks of ads on the show, 4 weeks of me mentioning his product, an incredible deal by any podcasting standard, or he gets a one-on-one consultation with me. So this month, he is choosing to do the ads, send you over to the HempSpot, and he's being nice, tossing in a promo code for you. Again, that's promo code Marc, 15% off. You can find those tiers over at Patreon, over at Subscribestar. Rockfin, you don't get the tiers. You just get all the extra content by subscribing to me for $10 a month. But the awesome thing about Rockfin, if you subscribe to me, you get all sorts of other creators. You also get access to premium content from my guest next week, a guy whose content I've really enjoyed over the years. Sam Tripoli will be my guest. You can listen or watch that full interview right now. Rockfin, Patreon, Subscribestar, support me any way you like. No matter how you do it, you'll be able to check out that full extended interview with Sam Tripoli as well. You can also check out my interview in 2 weeks, which is already available as well, with Jim Bob from the great Made by Jim Bob channel. Jim Bob does hilarious memes and cartooning and does some incredible live streams on his channel. I had an amazing conversation with him, again, for as little as $8 a month on Patreon or Subscribestar, $10 a month on Rockfin, but then you get all of their content and all of the other content on there as well. I just give you guys the options. I'm happy to get your support in any way. And if I can't get your financial support, if you can't make it work, That's okay. What I ask you to do is share the show, tell your friends about the show. I'm really trying to grow something from the ground up here, and I can use your help doing it. And of course, those 5-star ratings and those great reviews on Apple Podcasts specifically is still the best place for the algos, for those algorithms to help get this show up there when people are searching around for various topics. So please, any way you can help me, even if it's just kind words of encouragement, I really would support that. Find all the links again over at marcclair.com. That's MarcClair. Blah, I can't even spell my own name. MarcClair. marcclair.com. That's all I got this week. Until next time, in case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.